Jeff and Kara, welcome to the Meat Mafia podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. How's your Austin trip been so far?
The weather seems bipolar, but other than that, it's been good.
Nice.
Like 80 degrees to 50 degrees, depending on where you're standing downtown.
Absolutely. Is this, so how many podcasts have you both gotten to do together so far?
Together, a couple maybe.
Just a couple.
Yeah. Well, it's great for both of us to have you in. So I'm trying to think. I think it was Carnivore Cast that connected us originally, Jeff. We had you on virtually in fall or maybe early winter or something like that. Yeah. And we just had such an incredible episode with you, just learning about everything that you all are doing at Colorado Craft Beef. We talked, grain-fed versus grass-finished beef, how we should actually be thinking about ranching. It was a really eye-opening episode for both of us. So it's great to have both of you in because we learned during that podcast that, Kara, you're actually the 5th-generation rancher. That's how Colorado Craft Beef got started. So it's great to have you both on. Kara, I think it would be amazing just to learn a little bit more about your backstory and your family's backstory and how Colorado Craft Beef got started.
Sure. So our family homestead actually is only half a mile from where Jeff and I live now. The history obviously runs deep, over 110 years now. So it had been my great-great-grandfather came out during the Enlarged Homestead Act, which allowed a homesteader to move from where they were. My family actually moved from Kansas, took his wife and 4 children out to where he found the grass to be belly high on his horse and stopped in 1913. You officially have to wait 5 years to get the paperwork for your homestead. So in 1917, that's when we the official inception, I guess you could call it, of the ranch. But that piece of history is pretty deep. So now I'm the 5th generation and our little girls are the 6th. And part of Colorado Craft Beef was being able to take the ranch to the next generation, be able to continue that legacy of ranching, how we've done it where we have for, 5 generations now on to 6. And then, connecting back to not only our roots, but where we are in society today. So connecting with a different consumer, because the consuming public obviously has changed a lot in the last 100 years. We may still be ranching and producing beef very similar, but most of our consumers are 3 to 4 generations probably removed from where the food comes from. So this was a way to bring them back into where that comes from, have that connection, really know the ranch and know their source of their beef, and be able to ask some of the questions that a lot of people have about where their food comes from.
How do you guys think about bridging the gap with this legacy business of growing the business, but also maintaining the DNA of your family's legacy on the land?
Sure. That actually is a great question because we kind of wrestle with that every day. Both Jeff and I come from more of a business, sales, marketing type background. Of course, I grew up on the ranch and, was educated in animal science and honestly everything cows and ranching. But our consumer has changed enough that we're trying to bring them back to where that food came from, but also know that we're running a business as far as the ranch goes, and we have to do things differently now than we did in the early 1900s. So and one of the things that Jeff can probably talk about is part of why we started Colorado Craft Beef is the ranching environment has changed so much that we needed to look at doing things differently. The banking regulations, the way that the economics turn nowadays and some of those pieces of it is we want to be able to find our way to have still keep that tradition in mind, but also be progressive in what we do going forward.
That's great. If there's a little bit of a lag, Harry and I are sharing one mic right now, so we're swiveling it back and forth. So kind of repeating a question that I asked you, Jeff, when you came on the show, I'm just curious from both of your perspectives, is there anything that you think we're currently getting wrong in regards to understanding ranching? And what I mean by that is I see a lot of content from non-ranchers that are more like health and wellness content creators on social media. And they're basically saying look, if it's not regenerative grass-finished beef, it's not high quality, you shouldn't be eating it. And I personally feel like that's a little bit disingenuous. And my perspective on that is that when I was really sick in 2019, trying to get off all the meds I was on with ulcerative colitis, which we were talking about, Kara, the only thing that I could afford was like the budget cuts of meat on the outer aisle of the grocery store. And I ate that for an entire year and got into the best shape of my life and got off all the drugs and medication. So for me, I think our message is like, we certainly love to drive attention towards regenerative farmers, but beyond that, we just try and push people to get local sources of food and just connect directly with the farmer and cut out the middleman. So I'm just curious what both of your perspectives is on that, because I think there's a lot of people that want to change the way that they eat, but there's so much conflicting and confusing information. It can actually be overwhelming where they're like, well, now they're telling me if it's not regenerative and grass finish, I shouldn't even try this diet to begin with. So I'd love your perspective on that.
Yeah. I think the first thing to talk about with regenerative agriculture, I understand the premise of it and I understand the marketing behind it. But by calling something regenerative, we are insinuating that other processes are degenerative. And that's just not the truth. The problem is you're getting a lot of people that are 3 or 4 generations removed making these statements. And then you have agriculturalists or people somewhat familiar with ag greenwashing something to sell something else. So you get 4 or 5 conflicting data points about the same thing that aren't really coming from the source. They're coming from somebody with something to sell. And, you know, we're in that too, right? We're selling beef. But at the end of the day, you have to support the system that you want to support. And the one thing we'll never do is demonize the commercial supply chain. You know, 85% of the beef you buy in the U.S. comes from 4 companies. That's not ideal. But that beef is safe. It is inspected. It's fine to eat. It clearly got you better. And we will never be caught demonizing some other part of the market for profit. That's just unacceptable to us. And that's something that I really appreciate about what Kara and I stand for, is that's never wavered. You know, you could have too much beef. You could get worried about not selling product. But, man, you can't jeopardize what you stand for. And that's why Kara's family got to where they are. That's why you have 110 years of that, because you're that committed. And I think in today's society with news and social media and all the other craziness, it's hard to know where things come from. So understand that only 3% of the U.S. beef is grass finished. And that's in exceptionally regional areas, because most areas can't really grass finish in the way that we would all expect grass finish to be defined. Because where we live, you can't grass finish. People are like, oh, they're grass finished on pasture. Well, we can't do that year round. You can't. There's environmental constraints. So people have to be more understanding of what's going on, because if you want truly grass finished, I mean, I think, Kara, a lot of that comes out of Hawaii and Florida, right?
Most of it actually is imported from New Zealand.
There you go. But if you're in Colorado and you're saying it's much better for me to eat that, well, much better how? Do you have a histamine response? Is there something that drives your body and you say, I feel better when? Perfect. But understand what you're asking for of the market, because what you're being fed, no pun intended, may or may not be accurate when you are trying to understand the marketplace.
Well, and I'd even zoom out to the perspective of, and this was my perspective shift, you know, when I was pregnant with my first daughter and thinking about what I was fueling my body. And then, of course, now we have 2 young daughters, and that's a constant thing that's on my mind, is how are we fueling their bodies? And frankly, animal products, but particularly beef, is the top of my list, to make sure that they're having the proper nutrition to be able to fuel their bodies and their minds. Not necessarily, you know, thankfully we're blessed to know exactly where ours comes from and everything that went into it. And I know that not everybody can do that. But the fact that we're feeding them beef and milk and, you know, all of the animal-based products, that's something that I take a lot of solace in.
Mm. Yeah, it seems like on the back of the carnivore movement, the regenerative movement, that like have oddly grown together, which has been great to see. Like, there's so much information out there, but I still feel like a lot of people struggle with the basic premise of understanding some of the labeling laws out there, because there is a lot of lack of clarity around grass-fed and grass-finished.
Well,
so I'm
if
curious
you pause
to get
that
your
for
guys'
just
take
1
on that.
second.
Yeah.
The weirdest labeling law in the beef market is something I don't believe we talked about on my initial episode. If I say natural beef, what do you guys think that means?
I have no idea.
I would just think healthy.
That's That's exactly what they want you to think. Yeah. Because if you buy beef and it says natural beef on the package, it means minimally processed, no artificial ingredients. Now, if we say natural cattle, live cattle, no hormones, no antibiotics, all the things we would expect. But remember who controls 85% of the market. The word does not mean the same thing in the live versus the harvested space. So labeling laws are great, but you have to understand, in one side you're in the cattle industry and the other side you're in the beef industry. And that is an exceptionally different monkey to wrestle with.
Well, and those are just surely definitions. I mean, it wasn't even an agenda behind those. It was just that's how it's defined. So that's how the beef products are defined. The natural beef products is basically, any whole cuts, they classify as natural versus a different definition on the live cattle side. So there are a lot of variances depending on what kind of marketing claim that you're buying on. And that's something that Jeff and we talked about in depth before we started the business was I really don't like the labels, frankly. Sometimes there's not as much truth in a label as you'd like there to be. But when we've been so removed from our food chain, like you say, there's a lot of questions. You don't really know what a label may or may not stand for. And then we also know what it takes on the production side to be able to put these labels on a product.
Yes.
And typically it's money.
Yeah.
That is one of the biggest things that it takes. Of course, there's all the processes and things that go along with that, and it's third-party audited, but there's a price tag that goes along with it. So we'd rather just give out our phone numbers so people can ask questions.
Yeah. Because you really, at the grocery store, you really have no way to verify and ask questions. Like the four of us right now are in Austin, the birthplace of Whole Foods. And it's always interesting to talk to some of the old school ranchers that were like the initial like grass-fed ranchers that were getting into Whole Foods, and just the way that things have changed, particularly since they got bought out by Amazon. Like I can go to the Whole Foods downtown and I'll look at the label and it'll say like pasture-raised beef grown in the USA. And I'm like, well, what does pasture raised actually mean? And also with the Cool Act, I'm like, was this even grown in the USA, or was it just harvested in Brazil and then transported over here? And then if you ask the butcher, like 9 out of 10 of them have no idea what farm that it's coming from. So it's crazy how much things have regressed in the last 20 years with that.
Well, and zoom out from Whole Foods to a Kroger or an H-E-B, and you go buy the top shelf burger. Whatever brand it is. The branding is great.
Yeah.
But to get into a Whole Foods or a Kroger, you're talking semi-load minimums.
Yes.
That's 40,000 pounds of burger.
Yeah.
That's all the beef off 200, roughly? Yeah, 200 animals.
Mm-hmm.
Most ranchers cannot hit that scale.
Mm-hmm.
So where did it come from?
Yeah.
If you find a local butcher shop that can talk through that, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're buying it in food service, we can't at this point go into retail because we aren't big enough.
Yeah.
Because we can't meet the demands. It's a 40,000 pound minimum. Or if you try to go to a restaurant, I need 150 pounds of ribeyes a week. I'm like, well, don't we all? But then I have a lot of other stuff to sell.
Yeah.
So when you're playing those games and you get to that level that you can play in those spaces, nothing wrong with it, but it requires a different type of business than most ranchers are capable of doing.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that you both touched on was just the consolidation of these large corporate packers. I think the statistic that you used was that 4 packers control like 85% of all the beef in the grocery store. Do you have a sense, Kara, through your family lineage, like when did you see the shift from more localized processors to these big 4 kind of like gobbling everyone else up?
Gosh, even when I was a kid, they had different names and were less consolidated. But really, we started, more concentrated cattle feeding in the 60s. You're basically bringing cattle closer to feed instead of the model of how we have, cow-calf herds spread across the country. You start bringing them to a more localized area, closer to feed costs less, and then, of course, processing comes along with that because you don't want to be taking cattle from feed or off of feed, the finished product, to go to processing and hauling them 10 plus hours. I mean, that's not a good That's not a good thing from an animal welfare aspect. So we started consolidating where cattle were fed, and then we started consolidating where cattle were processed. And of course, with any manufacturing, economies of scale come to play, and the business side of it. So I don't know that I could.
Isn't that when the boxed beef market started taking over? Instead of restaurants getting half sides or quarter sides, boxed beef drove a lot of that market, didn't it?
It did. I don't know that I could tell you the date that happened, but it was kind of a shift of all of it. You get more consolidation in numbers, and some of the efficiencies and economies of scale, whether it was live cattle production or the harvest side.
And do you guys know the boxed beef market?
No,
we talked about that.
Yeah.
So back, I even remember when I was a kid, occasionally, because I'm probably the oldest one in here. You're welcome.
Somebody had to do it.
Yeah, somebody had to take that bullet. I remember you could go to the grocery store and you would see them with a side of beef, and they were breaking it down. And that was the beef they had that day, or, for a couple of days, whatever it was. They went away from that because hauling carcasses on a rail truck, because you had basically trucks built with rails inside of them that they could back up to a grocery store and wheel a carcass off of, was just inefficient. A lot of wasted space. They're swinging as they move. So they went to a boxed beef model when they started consolidating all the processing, where, I need 50 pounds of ribeyes. I need steamship rounds to make burger. And so it all went in boxes. So they call it boxed beef. That's when they started breaking it down into primals and subprimals to make it easier to move. So now, instead of having harvest facilities that would harvest the animal and split the carcass and then move the carcass, they now have fabrication on site where they're taking that carcass and breaking it into smaller pieces to make it more manageable for the industry. And that's where a lot of the consolidation came from, was that shift in the mindset.
Who are the biggest buyers of beef? Is it restaurants, grocery stores?
It'd be food distribution that feeds into all of that. So the distributors buy it and they sell to the grocery stores and the restaurant. It's all regional.
Gotcha. And is that as tightly held as the other side of the equation, the supply side, like the processing side?
I think regionally it's pretty tightly held, like Shamrock Foods or USA Foods or Cisco. All the food distribution networks, they hold their region, because you have to be at a certain size to have the buying power you need. Like, it's just capitalism. But
it must be interesting for you guys building out this direct consumer beef business, like really being able to own, and I mean this in like a good way, like own your customer, like build a relationship so you don't feel reliant on some of those distribution channels that, they could obviously like turn you away if you don't have enough supply or whatever it is. How have you guys thought about, really building that relationship with your customers to the point where they're coming back on a monthly basis?
So I have a story along those lines, and then this is the way I see it. And I've tried to explain this to a lot of different ranchers, because I'll take a step back for a second. I was in animal health for 10 years, and so I've been on a lot of different ranches in a lot of different parts of the country. And, we're having a conversation about how we can, optimize what they're doing or think about something differently. I ask them what they produce, and most of them will say, I raise a 600-pound calf and I sell them the second week of October. And I have to look at them and be like, no, you raise beef.
Yeah.
That's what you do. That's the heart of what you do. And I took that to heart of, if we don't have a consumer eating beef, we don't have a reason to do what we do.
Yeah.
So being able to have that connection back with that consumer and really think about it from their lens and their perspective. What I've said on a few different podcasts is our customer is the hero of their story, and we're the guide. So how can we provide them with an outstanding high-quality product that can help them live their life to the fullest? It's kind of like the Yoda Luke Skywalker dynamic, which I'm not much of a Star Wars person, but like that's the best example I can think of we're here to help them live their best life.
Yes.
And have that, kind of guide through your health journey or whatever it may be. However fueling their bodies and their families' bodies properly falls into that, think that's my philosophical thought on it.
I love that. So you being the guide, and as you being the guide, what are questions that you think the average customer should ask their rancher just to verify that, hey, this is someone that I should trust and really buy my meat from for my family?
Sure. That's a wonderful question, because I had it in my mind when we started the company, the questions we would be asked. And I was so far in left field because I've been in this industry my whole life. So I had so many thoughts about beef and ranching, and, I was very far in the weeds. And really, most of our customers just want beef they can trust. They want to know that there was a story behind it. They want to know the animals were taken care of well. They lived a quality life to be able to then put that product on their table so they can live a quality life.
Yes.
Jeff could probably hit on some actual questions, as he handles more of the customer service side, questions that we get routinely. But that's kind of the way that I see the process.
Yeah, we get a lot of the typical questions you would expect.
Yeah.
Are you grass finished? Are you regenerative? What I have found is that the answer to the question is not near as important as the fact that you answer the question. You make that human connection. Like, I've had people, you should be grass finished. Are you? I said, we are not. Here's why. This is why it would not work in our model. But I will tell you, this is exactly how we do it.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, well, so is grass finished better? I'm like, it could be, but not for us. We are not set up for that. And where we live in the world is not set up for that.
Yeah.
Here's why. And the other thing is, luckily, we have smaller bundle boxes. Like, you guys have seen the website.
Yeah.
We don't have a half beef entry point. You don't have to throw down $2,000 to try it.
Yeah.
So a lot of times I'm like, hey, we have a first time offer code, check it out, see if you like it. And they come back, or sometimes they don't. But having that human connection seems more important than really even the answer to the question. But what we end up doing more than anything from the customer service side is actually combating misinformation. Like the mRNA thing, when that blew up this summer, how many emails and phone calls do we get? Hundreds. Yes. I mean, it was a lot. Do you treat your cattle with mRNA vaccines? And Kara wrote a very good blog post about it. And then people are like, well, you're not saying you won't do it. I'm like, well, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
mRNA vaccines in cows is not a thing. And I will acknowledge that guy, was he from Missouri? A legislator from Missouri that's like, we gave mRNA vaccines twice yesterday to my cows. I was like, bro, no, you didn't.
Yeah.
And if you did, you are in hot water with the USDA because there's no approvals.
Yeah.
As far as we know, there's nothing even close to being approved, and we're pretty connected in that space. So we end up combating disinformation more than anything and trying to shield the industry from some of its own issues. And we do that, we've had people that, hey, I work with such and such farm. Why should I switch to you? I'm like, don't. If you have a farm you like and they're in your region, use them. I mean, we've had some subscribers. There was a gentleman ordered a ton of beef for like a year out of California and was always Johnny on the spot. And then one day he's like, hey man, I'm going to cancel my subscription. Do you mind? I was like, no, I'm good. What's going on? I found a local guy. His beef's good. I'm going to switch to something more local. I was like, awesome, man. Great job.
Yeah.
You're not upset? No, I'm good. That's what it's for. Like, I don't need all the California business. You're good.
Yeah.
And that level of connection is something that a lot of people won't take or invest the time in. And frankly, a lot of ranchers and agriculturalists don't have the time to invest. Because if you're not at scale and you're not moving that amount of product that it's paying enough for you to take those calls, reply to those emails, you can't make it work.
Yeah.
Because if you're doing 20 head a year, the math isn't there. You have to you have to be doing other things.
Yeah.
And that's the hard part. When you get the hobbyists that respectfully probably do a great job, but they end up sometimes upsetting customers because there's not a connection. And then the whole direct-to-consumer rancher-based model is turned off to that customer.
That's great. And Jeff, I think too, I feel like one of your gifts is the ability to just deliver some of these hard truths that people might not want to hear, but they should hear. And what I mean by that is, one of the things that really struck me when you came on the show is you essentially said, look, I'm highly, highly pro connecting with your local farmer. But when we think about feeding the masses at scale, like there are aspects of the industrial beef industry right now that are necessary. And I thought that was a really interesting point that just stuck with me for a few days, where it's like, as much as I hope that everyone could just immediately move local, the space isn't ready for it yet. So maybe you could touch on that and elaborate on that, because I thought that was an amazing point from our first episode.
Yeah. Well, if we think about it, really, let's just look at Austin. What are you going to grow here that everybody can eat year round? Nothing. I mean, you're going to have seasonality. Like have you ever traveled in Europe? I traveled in Europe one time, and it was during asparagus season. I'm here to tell you that we had asparagus in gosh damn everything. It was asparagus soup. It was asparagus salad. It was everywhere because it was very seasonal. This is what's available right now. Okay, that works. But if you overlay the map of the U.S. over Europe, it's a significantly different geometric issue with pockets of population that are much harder to get to. So what do you do to feed those pockets? How many people are in Austin? I guess I don't know the population.
I don't know either. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the average American consumer eats 78 pounds of beef a year. The average steer is going to produce about 450 pounds of beef. How many cattle do we need just to feed Austin? Yeah. I mean, it's a mathematical dilemma. I'm not saying it's not solvable, but on Steve's podcast this morning, I said, you got to be careful if you rip the Band-Aid off that actually your arm falls off, because it's way worse than you thought. And there's a lot of people that want to, take a hard line approach. But if you have to take a hard line approach on that, and you're in the Central Valley of California, you got a lot better chance. If you're in Western Minnesota, where I used to live, well, from October to May, you're going to be eating walleye and deer. Mm. And you're only going to do that for a couple of weeks because you're going to run out. I mean, or, we're in Austin, right? Rogan's down the road somewhere. He's a hunter. I grew up hunting. How many elk do you think there are in the United States? Whole United States.
100,000?
It's like 1 million, I think, the last number I saw. Well, we harvest 600,000 cows a week nationally. I'm not saying it's not fixable, but the math and the scale at which we need to produce to sustain is exceptionally challenging. Mm. And while those 4 companies do control 85% of the market, they do a pretty solid job of making sure we're all, packed with enough nutrients we can have a conversation like this.
Yeah. So you guys recently got into the processing game with your new processing facility. So first off, congratulations. And second off, I'm just curious to get your guys' take on how you guys see that getting integrated into the business and how you guys see that changing what you guys are doing or actually amplifying your guys' ability of what you're able to do.
Go ahead.
This is your world.
Well, to back it up, prior to August, we used a local processor that harvested our cattle, produced our summer sausage all in-house, and the gentleman, his name is Mike, was actually a classmate of mine at Colorado State. Great guy. I've known him for 20 years now. And over the last couple of years, we talked to him about potentially joining forces. Hey, we can make a bigger play at all these things if we work together. That collaborative nature that agriculture really doesn't do as well as you hope they should. And it took some time. And then we found some other like-minded individuals that are very much in our camp. America first, owning your own supply chains, being able to tell a story, having a connection to where everything comes from, not just your food, but being intentional and having good craftsmanship. And in all of those things, we put together a potion, and it magically, over the span of about 12 months and about 10,000 more gray hairs for me, because I was unaware they were coming on that quickly, we were able to close a deal in August. Wow. And we partnered with the harvest facility we've been using, and we did it with no operational interruption. So the entire crew was fired at 5:00 on a Wednesday and hired at 5:01 on Wednesday, and the plant never skipped a beat. Mm. Same management, same crew, same quality.
Yeah.
But now what that's allowed us to do is be more deliberate in where we can go with the company.
Mm-hmm.
So there is some expansion plans at the harvest facility so that we don't do the opposite of what we just spent an hour talking about, right? We're not going to buy the harvest facility with the intention of upsetting the local market. Our competitors harvest in there too. That's a bit of a conundrum that we had to make some awkward phone calls, which all went well.
Yeah.
But we're planning some expansion so that we can take on more load as craft beef grows, but also maintain those other companies.
Yeah.
Because we're not trying to show up with an axe and go to work,
Yeah. Because to you, it's not a zero-sum game. You want to prop up the other ranchers. I think you said like our ranching brothers and sisters, I think was the term that you used the first time you came on the podcast. And it's also exciting too. We went out to White Oak Pastures right around Christmas time last year with Will Harris.
Sure.
And we were just asking him, did you notice any differences during COVID in terms of supply chain, lead time with customers? He has 2 slaughterhouses, and he was like, because this is a closed loop system, just felt like business as usual. They were able to, feed their entire local community. They were able to ship beef nationwide. So I'm sure there's probably that peace of mind too, that if anything does happen, you've now created this closed loop system for yourselves as well.
Yeah. One of the first things, actually, we have a good friend of ours that came on with us full time. She has experience in the processing world, and she claims to be ADHD. I don't know that that's totally accurate, but she's very detail oriented. And she's like, hey, there's rumblings of COVID coming back. During COVID at her old facility, we had trouble getting cleaning supplies, getting nitrile gloves, getting some of the general personal protective equipment. She's like, where are we at? And I emailed our guy that's running the plant, the former owner that's now a business partner of ours. I said, hey, what do you stock? And he goes, about a month. I said, triple that. Put 3 months worth of stuff on the shelves. He's like, great, done. Well, you have an ability to control that.
Yeah.
You have an ability to think forward. You have an ability to own your own value chain. Because when somebody says, hey, you're a processor, I'm like, that's actually a negative too, because people call them, especially before we got bigger, hey, whoever packed my box, you need to tell them they did it wrong. I'm like, bro, you are talking to him.
Yeah.
Who packed your box is on the phone with you right now. What is wrong? But we've taken that, roll your sleeves up and get to work mentality and just continue to grow it. Actually, since we spoke, we took down our own feed yard in October last year. So we really are, aside from the cow-calf herd, vertically stood up from bottom to top. So we can scale our business and with confidence talk to our consumers about what they can expect without really having any issues with quality or concerns with value chains or something else. To some degree, that's a little scary because there's not a finger to point really anywhere other than in the mirror. But I think that's the hope, is that more people can get to that spot. And in the national market compared to some of the other farmer-owned processors that we're familiar with, we're going to be, I wouldn't say orders of magnitude larger, but we are going to be larger. And based on us being in Colorado, more centrally located, so that doesn't hurt.
I think what was also really cool is that you were able to successfully raise an amazing round with some incredible investors too. And you're one of the only ranches that we know of that's actually raised outside capital. And I'm just curious because I feel like with both of you, you blend together this incredible ranching and also business skill set too, to show that you can raise cattle the right way and also make really nice profit margins while doing so. Do you think that we'll continue to see, more people with a business background getting into ranching? Do you think we'll see fundraising and getting outside capital for ranchers more common? I'm just curious, if you were to look into the future, do you see that being more commonplace?
Do you have an opinion on that, Kara? Before I espouse my finance dork thoughts.
There's been some recent examples within the ranching space to kind of carry that thought process that we can do better together than alone. I'd say it's still kind of a scarcity as far as that mindset. We're typically traditionally fiercely independent. So some of that collaborative mindset isn't received as well in some spaces as you think it could be. But I do think that is the trajectory is moving the right direction, to think about it more of a system and lifting up from our system, and then, bringing in, the strategic side of that, because that's where especially coming from where I came from, I knew the disconnect was from the ranch to the doorstep to the plate, because we were so far removed from that we just didn't have that direct line. So when we looked at a strategic partnership, we looked at it that way, of surely strategic as well, of how do we bridge that gap and bring it here versus just having, your cart over here and your horse over here, and, not ever really putting those two together to move forward and be able to move a heavier load. So,
yeah, I do believe you're going to see more people trying to get into the space. If you look, did you guys watch The Big Short? The movie about the housing fall apart?
Great. Yeah.
Great movie. But at the very end, the mad scientist guy, whatever the heck his name was. Yeah. Well, what's he doing now? What'd they say at the very end of the movie? Now he's looking into the water system.
Yeah.
There's the same type of people looking into the food system. It's coming.
Yeah.
The interesting thing that I feel set Kara and I apart in that space is our ability to have a conversation like this, to leave the ranch and be comfortable, to understand the business and the production side, and sell that on more than financials. Because we did put together a round. It went very, very well. But these guys aren't our investors. They are our partners, 110%. They are more involved, and I've done other business deals and equity and things like that. These guys are helping us. They're adding value. They aren't just a checkbook waiting for a return. They're very much on mission with what we're doing, not to use a term that is so heavily used by that crew, but they're on mission with what we're doing. That's more important than any of the rest of it. And it was interesting. So, I think the listeners are probably wondering who the heck we're talking about, but to really put it into perspective, if you listen to Jocko podcast and you go back and you look Pete Roberts, who is the original founder of Origin, and you listen to Jocko and Pete talk on the podcast, it would have been August of 21. And there was a couple episodes before that. Pete talks about the struggles they had with starting up Origin, being U.S. made, being told they couldn't do it, being told the system wouldn't support it. You're too small. You'll never compete. I mean, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. It's all the same stuff we've dealt with. And when we first started talking to him, I went back to, okay, I knew of them. Obviously, everybody's listened to Jocko, and if you haven't, I don't know what you're doing with your life. I mean, he's everywhere. But trying to understand where the synergies were, take the time to listen to that. And I sent an episode to Kara, and she's like, that is our story. They're talking about cotton and geese and a whole bunch of other crap, but it's our story. That's exactly what we have struggled through. And when we started talking to those guys, it wasn't even a pitch. It was, let's put this together. And we couldn't be more proud of what happened, but we also couldn't be more honored to have gotten through that process with people like that. So, our partners are Jocko Willink, Pete and Brian, who were the other co-founders of Jocko Fuel. There's some other people in the background, and then some of the other names that people would know, especially in your crew. Dr. Sean Baker is one of our partners. That was humbling. The guy, he's probably the best advocate for beef I've ever seen. And I don't know that he's ever even owned cows until now.
He's changed your life in some ways too, right? How much weight did you lose doing his carpet diet?
Like 80 pounds.
That's life changing.
Wow. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I can't pay enough thank you to that guy. And then you have other people on the team that work with Jocko, like Dave Burke, Top Gun fighter instructor, or Travis Mills, quad amputee from the 82nd Airborne, who left me speechless at an event, which I didn't know was was a thing. Yeah. And, Chris Cavallini, who's a retired Navy diver. And it's incredible to see all those people want to help in the space. Now, granted, they all love steak. That helps. And when you can offer to send people steak, that's a really great way to get them agreeable.
It's a good...
Thank you. Yeah,
it's a good negotiating tool.
I think that's going to be the title of my book, is Beef as a Currency.
I like it.
But, putting that all together was I wouldn't say that was the mission from day one, but the mission was to do something that the ranch wasn't going to do, to do something that ag wasn't typically going to do. And Kara and I's skill sets are complementary in a way that you can go out and put a deal together like that, that passes muster with people like that, that, you know, let's be fair. You don't get out of bed and put a deal together with Jocko. That took some work, but they were fair. And the coolest thing about it is every one of those guys is exactly who you expect them to be.
Really.
And that level of integrity is something we look up to, and we try to espouse within ourselves. But at the end of the day, that matters so much more than financials or board meetings or any of that, because it's about who you're doing business with. And if we really peel it back to where we come from, there's very few things in this world that we consider more American than somebody on a horse moving cows on a pasture. And the only thing more American than that is the soldiers that allow us to do that. And for those guys to want to be part of our mission is just incredible.
Yeah. I'm
sorry for the heavy bomb there. But.
No, the story is incredible, and it's truly inspiring to just think that those deals, like just imagining what those deals look like coming together, and the alignment, just like not even knowing Jocko is, you know, from a distance, and knowing you guys, like there seems like so much alignment. I'm curious how you guys perceive, like what got their attention, what got them excited about Colorado Craft to join the team and be a part of what you guys are doing. It's clear to me, but I'm wondering if there are any good stories that you guys have about just like those light bulb moments where you saw them really get excited about what you guys are up to.
I can't really think of any one moment. I mean, when we sent steak, that certainly helped. You know, because actually I spoke at Colorado State University last week to a marketing group in an MBA program. And we went around the table and I said, what's the most important part of marketing? And they were, you know, branding this and whatever. And I said, what about having a good product? You can have all the great branding you want, but if the product sucks, no amount of marketing is going to help.
Yeah.
So, you know, all the work Kara does and the legacy piece and the ability to tell a story that is more than we have a company and we're trying to pay the light bill.
Yeah.
That level of connection, I think, really is what stood out. And, you know, it's a great question, you know, for anybody trying to raise funding for a project. How do you stand out? You know, because it's interesting. You have more ability and more connection to anybody in the world right now than you've ever had in the history of humans. But if you're reaching out to the right people, you're not the only one.
Yeah.
How do you make that impact?
Yeah.
What do you talk about?
Yeah.
And how do you stay hooked up? Because I'm here to tell you that it took a long time before we got on the phone with those guys to get our side of the deal done. And then another 13 months to get the other side of the deal done. And we did a media weekend over July 4th. And there's a video of me going to the grill. It took me a minute to realize who it was because the dude was wearing my pants and my shirt, but the back of his head had a lot of gray hair on it. And I was really pissed when I realized it was me.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't come without a trade-off.
Yeah.
And the thing that I would tell, you know, all our brothers and sisters in ag, we didn't get there with a scarcity mindset. We didn't get there worrying about how much they were going to get out of the deal.
Yeah.
We got there by being collaborative. And that's the biggest thing I see within our ag community is people that, well, I'm selling my calves for $2,000. Oh, well, what? I didn't get that. It's like, well, did you make a fair deal? Why are you worried about the other side of the table? And that mindset in most industries, like I could see it in the fitness industry or the supplement industry. If you start thinking that way, you're going to be so worried about the other guy, you're not going to get your own stuff done.
Yeah.
And, you know, run your race.
Yeah.
And be cognizant of your marketing competitors, but run your own race.
I'd add to that it's the why. You know, it was the why of why Colorado craft beef actually came into existence. And like you said, the legacy piece and the story and the really wanting that connection back to where your food comes from. You know, kind of the heart and soul of America. Like this is the way the American West was settled, is we ran cattle on it.
Yeah.
It wasn't suitable for a whole lot else. You know, there's a lot of houses out there now, but the original inception of the American West is cattle and grazing and, you know, the wide open spaces and the American cowboy that went west. So thinking about the why of what we're doing and how that aligned with, you know, our partners, but also I think that's what really resonates with our customers too. You know, they know that there's heart and soul in this.
Yes.
It's not just we're buying beef from somebody and we're reselling it. I mean, it's bigger than that, and it means more.
Yeah. Carol, what's the feeling? I don't know if it's even possible to describe. What is the feeling for you being 5th gen, seeing everything your family has gone through to get to Colorado Craft to the point where it is now, to see these amazing progressions that you've made in the last couple of years? Now you have kids that are 6th generation. What is that feeling like, just seeing the ranch and the business grow so much these last couple of years?
It's crazy. I remember when Jeff and I were on a plane back to Maine, and we looked at each other and we're like, we did this. Did we really do this?
Yeah.
I guess we're getting on the plane, and here we are. So it's incredible to see that it can be done. Is I had so many industry meetings across the country, and we're a group of, you know, like-minded ranchers and producers from across the country, and we just look around the table, and of course that table is shrinking as well, and it's aging, and everybody's like, well, what are we going to do in the future? What does that look like? And I remember having the same thought process of, you know, what do we do if we go home? What do we do when we have children? What does this look like for us? What does it look like for them? And all I remember thinking of, something has to be done.
Yeah.
So I could continue to do what I'm doing, you know, in animal health and have my career in industry, or come back to the ranch and continue on the way it's been done. Or I can think about it differently. And the question always is, well, if not me, then who? So I took that to heart of, I guess it needs to be me.
Yeah.
So let's do something different. Let's kind of change the trajectory. Let's look at things differently and be able to kind of have that platform. And it's a pretty crazy feeling to be to that point. So
yeah. Hearing you both speak about it actually like gave me chills. It's just so amazing. Even just since we met, the progression that you all have been on is amazing. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, when I feel like I hear a lot of people say that ranching is unprofitable as a business, and I'm just curious, what are your reactions when you hear that? Or is there anything that you wish either those ranchers or people knew about their business that could make them more profitable in the space?
I could get very far in the weeds on that.
Please do. Please do.
I'll just talk money when Kara's done. But
yeah, that might need to be a whole nother episode. But
podcast.
Unfortunately, a lot of times in ranching, we're so heavily based in tradition that we just rely on tradition. We don't necessarily look at it as a business. And a ranch still needs to be treated like a business because it is one. There is an incredible emotional tie to the land and the animals and the way of life, frankly. That's a lot of terminology gets thrown around is, well, it's just about the way of life. Well, you don't have the way of life if it doesn't continue to be sustainable, which is a piece of profitability, and making sure that we truly are looking at this enterprise as a business and making appropriate business decisions accordingly. There's so many examples I can think of, you know, on the cow side of being able to, you know, select cows and, you know, make better heifers and utilize the technologies that we have in place. But I'd say it's that big thought process of it still does need to be treated as a business, balancing that with all the other pieces of the emotional tie that go into it.
Mm. Yeah, probably the finance guy opinion. A lot of people in commodity agriculture, if you're raising hay or you're raising cows or you're doing whatever, the biggest issue you run into is most of the time you're not exceptionally profitable. So Kara's dad will say that if you're running yearlings, which is, you buy weaning calves, you raise them until it's time for them to go to a feed yard, and then you sell them. You're a middle spot in the industry. And the industry standard is if you do that well, most years you're going to make about $100 an animal. All right, that's fair. But that $100 an animal has rang true for the last 40 years. Cattle are worth 3 times more than they were 40 years ago, and you still make $100. So your return on capital, if you want to do the math, is approximately 1/3 of what it used to be, and horrible. Your sub 6% ROCE, return on capital investment. Well, we could probably all agree that's not great. And not to mention, you have a ton of financial risk out on the table. You can get insurance, you can do other things, but it all comes at a price. So the biggest thing in a lot of the agricultural models, especially if you are a commodity producer, so we're in the value-added producer space. We're doing something that we are taking commodity product and making it better. But if you are strictly a price taker, you raise wheat, it goes in a truck, it goes to the elevator, you get what they are paying on that day, or maybe you contracted. Typically in those type of scenarios, they're making some money, but that's the money they need to live. And the real estate they're farming or the real estate they're ranching on appreciates. So you could make the argument that they are not, in fact, farmers. They farm the land and they are real estate investors, depending on how you want to break the math out. I might get some hate mail for that statement, but that is the math. You're covering your cost of living, and the appreciation on the real estate is what drives things up. But if you're a legacy operation, what are you going to do when the patriarch wants to retire? You can't sell real estate to give them cash, because then what do? Now you don't have the real estate. Now you got to lease it. That's a cost. If you sell it and get them the cash, now maybe you don't lease the ground back, but now you're running fewer units and making less money. It's a nasty, vicious cycle. And the banking industry is exceptionally tightening the screws on commodity producers, especially the value-added producers, because you're doing something non-standard. Right. It's kind of untenable unless you are at scale and you can trade the commodity markets and you can do proper risk management. It's ugly. So it can be very profitable. It can be exceptionally unprofitable. But Kara actually has a comment that I've refused to steal if she's in the room. Your failure versus success comment. I try not to steal that when you're around, because that one was all yours.
That's only when you're solo.
Yeah, when I'm by myself, I'm like, Kara said this, and it was really smart, and I'm going to put it on a T-shirt and not tell her.
So in the traditional ag mindset, it's historically been somebody would rather fail conventionally than succeed unconventionally. And that's the mindset that we've battled, frankly. So the changing your mindset of the trajectory, because it is, especially in such a traditional industry, it is very hard to do something different, put yourself out there, go out on a limb, even if it's going to be successful or it turns out to be successful. There's always that, looming thought process of, oh, well, what will my neighbor think? Or, maybe like you say, the patriarch of the family, what will they think about this? Do I have buy-in? Do I not? So there's a lot of mindset that goes into that may not be at play with some other businesses, but it definitely is within agriculture because it is such a traditional industry.
Yeah, and the flip side of that really hampers things. I'm familiar with a lot of different ranching and farming operations across the country. I can think of one in particular in Oregon, a buddy of mine back home. He owns, I think, one section of ground. The family owns thousands and thousands of acres. He's worked for the ranch his whole life. He's my age.
Wow.
He doesn't really have a retirement. He's not sure how the succession plan looks. Grandma's still alive, isn't changing anything. You're now 3 generations down, and you're hoping all the succession planning gets set correctly so that the 20 years you've spent there aren't wasted. There's some folks we know in western Nebraska that patriarch of the family, grandpa, dad, son. Grandpa passes away. He was in his 80s. Dad was 60. Son was mid-40s or somewhere in there. Well, no succession plan was in place. The dad and the son had worked at the farm their whole lives. No retirement, no anything, with the understanding that the farm would be partly theirs. Well, there's no succession plan in place. Patriarch passes away unexpectedly. There's 4 kids under him. They carved that farm into quarters. The remainder that still live on the farm don't have the money to buy it. The other 3/4 of the family wants to sell it, and they offload it. It's gone overnight, and you didn't protect it. You didn't build a system around it. So you're a commodity farmer, not doing a value add, not in a position that you can do proper succession planning because you can't make them. But you want to try to preserve the legacy, and at the end of the day, you get totally destroyed. What do you do?
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things that Kara and I were like, not to say that any of that's happening at the ranch. Colorado Craft Beef is ours and ours alone. Well, it was. Now we have great partners. But we built it in spite of that model and where we see it treat agriculture because, Kara's dad's awesome at what he does. We want him to be able to do that as long as he wants to, and we don't want to put undue pressure on him. You got to do your own thing, and fortunately, we were in a position to do that. There's a lot of people in the commodity ag space that don't get to go to college because they need farm help.
Right.
Then what do you do? Now you're 45, you've worked on that farm your whole life. Everything crumbles around you and you're smoked. You can go work on another farm for $50,000 a year.
Dang.
What are you going to do? And that's where everybody gets upset with bigger farmers getting big. That's why they get successful. They have those things built. They have other entities that pay people, and then they have their house in order. But the traditional mindset of ag doesn't allow you to do that in a lot of cases.
There's so much I want to unpack with all of that, like the fear topic of just like handling a lot of the risk in terms of just being a business owner, but also just the industry of farming and the direction that it's heading with, like most ranchers are now like thinking about transitioning their inherited or their land over to the next generation, and a lot of the next generation isn't necessarily prepared or wanting to or willing to take on the ownership of the farm. And that seems like, a trend or something that's happening, whether we like it or not. And, it's going to be here quickly. And I'm assuming that it's going to really have a massive impact on people who, are either big farms who can just scoop that land up, or the actual people who are in those markets and are unable to pass on that land to somebody else. It's like, what do you do? So I'm curious, maybe on that vein, just how do you guys see that trend transpiring in the next several decades? Like the average age of a farmer is what, 60?
I think it's like 62.
62?
I could be wrong.
I think you're about right.
Yeah.
About 65 because it was early 60s.
That was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you guys see more consolidation happening and just bigger players just scooping up land as that turn happens, or?
I think you see a mixture of all of those things. Probably the most disconcerting is the amount of institutional capital buying real estate in the farming world. So, like, I know of a hop farm up in Yakima, up in the Yakima Valley in Washington, that was sold a few years ago to the retirement trust fund for the teachers in Canada. It's their 401k. It's their investment vehicle. Because the real estate turn, they want that real estate that's going to continue to appreciate. You never find a shortage of people willing to lease the real estate. No big deal. And that's probably the scariest part to me, is the number of non-ag people investing in the real estate. And in some form and fashion, you're going to start to lose a lot of the knowledge that allowed those areas to be profitable. And that turnover is going to be really curious to watch.
Mm-hmm.
I think not just non-ag, but the potential of foreign owned as well worries me from our food system. That's one of the things that I hold pretty near and dear to my heart, is that we can feed ourselves.
Yeah.
And that is something that in this country that we're blessed to be able to feed ourselves, and we want to make sure that we can maintain that. So I think that's something that probably shouldn't be overlooked, is making sure that we can continue to provide food to our own country.
Yeah. Have you heard about these C40 cities? Have you heard about this at all?
I haven't.
So it's a climate agreement that's been passed in 96 cities across the globe. New York being one, London being one. There's like 14 cities in the U.S. And the goal is to essentially help the environment by severely limiting red meat consumption. So the goal is by 2030 to restrict the red meat access down to 0 pounds of meat consumed a year per citizen. So my question to you is, when you hear things like that going on, do you think that it's going to be table stakes in the next 5 years to just have a relationship with your local rancher, like get outside the grocery store and actually, shake the rancher's hand, know who they are, and be able to source all your food from them?
Without really having any background on that, yes, you should totally do that. I think that'd be a whole other podcast in and of itself, is what that would do. But if we think about, what you guys do and your journey and what you guys are, promoting, what are the health ramifications in those cities? No red meat. What's the health ramification going to be? How's the health system going to hold up? But, in all fairness, the most easily transported and distributed nutrition source we have in the country is meat.
Mm-hmm.
You can ship a truckload of salad, but that's not going to help a lot of people.
Yeah.
You ship a semi-load of meat, that's real food.
Yeah.
I think people are going to get a little too far out over their skis in some of these things, and they're going to have to wind it back in a hurry.
Mm-hmm.
I hope it does not come to that.
Yeah.
But I think there's going to be some overcommitments, because I would hate to see how that would actually play out. But it was, when did the JBS harvest facilities get hacked? Was that 21?
I believe so.
Yeah. So JBS, one of the big packers, their system, they ransomwared one or two of the harvest facilities they use, shut them down for like 2 days. And Kara put up a post on social media and said, this is the 4th supply chain disruption in 16 months.
Yeah.
If you don't know where your food is coming from, what in the heck are you waiting for?
Mm-hmm.
And we don't say that from a doomsdayer standpoint.
Yeah.
And if you have a freezer with a couple weeks worth of food in it, you're pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, if it gets past that, we've all got way bigger problems.
Yeah.
But if you don't have some connection, you're probably missing the boat. Do you guys know who Temple Grandin is?
Yes.
So Temple Grandin wrote an article during COVID, and she said, I'm probably butchering this, but the essence of it was, COVID has proven that our supply chains are efficient yet fragile. So if that fragility is something you're not paying attention to, and you live in a high rise in Austin, and you have ding dongs, Oreos, and 1 bottle of water, and stuff goes real bad, you're 6, 12, 24 hours from needing to make something happen.
Mm-hmm.
That's a real dangerous spot to be in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've said before, a hungry person has one problem. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I think we've taken for granted, frankly, as far as having these abundant, nutritious food sources in this country. And COVID was very eye-opening for me, and I think it was very eye-opening for a lot of people within our generation, because we've never seen anything like that. We had customers calling and being like, can we get beef? There is none on the shelves. There's some Beyond Burger, but that's it. That's all we can find. I think it was the Colorado Springs Costco. I mean, the shelves were completely wiped out of any beef product known to man besides that.
And that was the first we'd heard of it.
Exactly, because, of course, we have a walk-in, 20 feet from the house that's stacked with beef. But so
this was like the first weekend it went sideways.
Yes, yeah. And we were back ordered for 8 months because of that situation. That, in my mind, I'm like, our generation has never seen that. They've never went to the store and been like, I cannot get the food that I need.
Well, even your dad said that, right? Even Kara's dad was like, I've not seen anything like this.
Yeah,
and he's mid-60s?
Yes, mid-60s.
And it's like, well, we've never seen it. He's never seen it.
Yeah.
I mean, Dave was genuinely concerned, like, man, what in the heck is going on? That's a big wake-up call. And I don't think enough people heard the bell.
I would agree, because we had one young daughter. I mean, I had just come off maternity leave and started back to work, and then COVID hit. And I couldn't imagine being in the situation where I couldn't get her nutritious food.
Yeah.
I just, that blows my mind. And that's scary enough for me to, even if we weren't doing what we were doing, to make sure that I knew that I had access to high quality food.
Yeah. Yeah, I was living in New York City in the middle of the pandemic. I'm from Jersey. I was in New York right up until that point. And I feel like now being in Austin, now we know so many local ranchers and farmers and people to source food from. It makes me realize just how vulnerable everyone actually is there. And what's interesting is the biggest question that we still get asked, even for people that have listened to the show for a long time, is like, how can I find a local farmer to connect with? Like, it's still so interesting to me how connected we are from the people that are actually growing and harvesting our food.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Well, and depending on where you're at, you could still be a long way from somebody. I mean, I'm not saying you can't find food in Albuquerque, but if you want you want lamb, finding somebody in Albuquerque is not going to be easy. If you want pork in Florida, you're probably going to struggle. Like, people are unaware of how blessed we are in this country to really have the food you want, when you want it, how you want it. You know, we went and had lunch today, and food was great.
Yeah.
No big deal. But people around this world don't have that benefit. And I think this is my thought on, grass finished, grain finished, whatever, all those different things. We are exceptionally fortunate to be in a position that we are well nourished enough to have that argument while we know we're going to dinner in 20 minutes, right?
Right.
Life's real hard for us.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that really frustrates us when people are like, well, this is wrong. I'm like, well, understand, we also export a massive amount of food out of the United States. It's not just you're worrying about.
Right.
Somebody in the Horn of Africa needs something, or people in Southeast Asia want beef. A lot of people depend on us too. So let's not be so self-absorbed that we miss the bigger point. And if there's a certain system you like, whatever it may be, grass-finished yaks, do you, man, go buy that. Support that system with your money. But, to your point, when you came back from your health challenges, don't demonize somebody for doing the best they can. Hey, I'm getting the best beef I can, the best way I can, and, it's not as good as I want it to be, but it's good, it's better. Let people do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I think the grocery store, the outer edge of the grocery store is significantly better than all the cellophane in the middle. But, I was on Andy Stumpf's podcast a couple of years ago, and we talked about organic food. And there's so many things we can unpack with that. But the thing that annoys myself, and Kara's echoed this before, the people that want to demonize a single mom for not feeding their kid organic, or hammer them for, food shaming. Why?
Right.
Man, leave the gal alone.
Right.
Yeah. The point I was making was just like the good, better, best approach, where like just meat in general is good, and it's going to be way better for you than like the Wheat Thins or the Cheetos or the Doritos that are just like combining corn, wheat, and soy.
Crunchy Cheetos are pretty legit.
They're pretty delicious, yeah. But that's more so what I meant, is like just being able to eat animal products in general, regardless of the sourcing, is so much better than anything you're going to get in the inner aisle, just like feeding that industrial food complex.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, and you've made a comment before, Kara, about the bioavailability of beef, and that is something I am probably not authorized to talk about. Do you want to share that a little bit? Because I'm going to butcher it and you're going to correct me.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm authorized to talk about it, but it's also kind of laced with the fact that we raise cattle, and we do for specific reasons, because the grasslands that we run on aren't suitable for anything else. They're not suitable for growing, row crops or really any other farming. We have a haysicle that sits in our front yard because it was in the weeds by my dad's, like behind my dad's house, because that's where it's set after my grandpa's horses ran off with it in the 60s and decided he would never farm again because our ground just wasn't made for that. So cattle, being a ruminant, which basically they have 4 separate compartments in their stomach. It allows them to use those food sources, the grass that we can't use for anything else, and the ground that we aren't using for literally any other reason, especially where we are. And they can turn that into the highest quality protein that we can possibly get. So just the fact that they can do that and then convert it into this wonderful protein source. And red meat, I mean, our bodies are geared for that. I don't want to go down the chicken track, but I obviously have my opinions on just beef is a superior protein source, as far as the bioavailability to our bodies and how it nourishes our bodies. And frankly, fat is not the devil. Our bodies need fat, and we are able to get that fat content in our beef products. And frankly, it's the way that they're finished, the way that they're grain finished. So we're able to have that higher amount of fat that fuels especially our minds and our bodies. So if we're gonna choose something, and I take that very seriously as far as what we choose to put on our children's plates, that's the center of their meal, is any animal-based protein source, but primarily red meat and milk. Those are the 2 things that we make sure are the center of their diet for a reason, for a nutritional reason, not just philosophical. So,
what do you guys think about the rise of the vegan movement with that in mind? Because I feel like people are so susceptible to these new trends that pop up, and obviously the veganism has been around for decades, but it seems like we might be moving past its popular phase. But it was very popular in mainstream for a while, and a lot of parents are taking that advice to feed their kids a vegan diet. And then you have the concerned parents who are trying to get the real information, and it just plays in this whole idea of that it's very confusing out there for this simple question of like, what should we feed our kids?
It absolutely is. And frankly, that breaks my heart that that's even a topic of conversation, that there are children that are not as well nourished as they should be because of misinformation. I mean, when you think about our body's composition of protein, we need to fuel it with protein so they can replenish itself.
Yeah.
And even with milk, I've seen this trend of everybody's like, your children should not be having whole milk. They should have skim milk because fat is bad. And I'm like, absolutely not. Fat is fueling their brains. Yeah. So, that's just what we feed our children. And it's really unfortunate that misinformation has moved that trend. I hope that, like with Dr. Baker and some of these other MDs that were helping to kind of redirect that path, would be my hope. But I'd say to all the parents out there, find the science. That's look at the science, and if we think about the way children even have been marketed to, that's scary. There's so much of, whether it's the sugary breakfast manufacturers, frankly, that go down the track of marketing to children of, you want this. Well, of course they would rather eat sugar, but is that really what's nutritionally best for that child? No. So then you market to children and they come home and ask their parents to have,
Cocoa Puffs or
what, name the sugary cereal for breakfast, when they're already setting their day up with a terrible trajectory versus fueling them with high quality protein when they first wake up in the morning to be able to fuel their minds and their bodies. So,
yeah, I think the weirdest thing for me about the vegan movement is the number of vegans that are now carnivores.
Yeah.
Which I support, but I also wonder why it's so binary. Right. If you're vegan, your move is to go strict carnivore. That's playing hopscotch.
Yeah.
It's so confusing to me to operate in that zero-sum game.
Yeah.
Seems more like a mentality to me.
Yeah, like if you're not all in, you're not in. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it is coming around, but I've said it twice already. The fact that you live in a country that's the biggest thing you're struggling with in life is still pretty dang good.
Yeah. Yeah, I think to Kara's point, I think there is some just like extremist nature to that part of the brain. But I also think too that I think certain people, they're so sick that they're willing to just do these extreme diets just to try and get the health outcomes that they ultimately want. So I think about that. And then to carry your earlier point, did you know that it's actually illegal to sell whole milk in public schools? It's literally illegal to sell full fat milk in schools. I just found that out. And now there's some, I don't know exactly what it's called, but they just passed something where in 100,000 public schools, Lunchables will now actually be an entree option for kids. So you can't get full fat milk, but now you can go and actually get like the Lunchables pizza or the crackers. And it's just wild what we've come to.
It is wild. The regulations or politics or whatever it may be is at play when it comes to how we fuel our bodies and our families' bodies. That's just beyond me, that it has become more of a political statement than what's actually the most nutritious for us.
Yeah. How do you think about, with the perspective that you both have on nutrition, you said you have 2 young girls, right? How do you think about just like pushing your philosophy on nutrition and feeding them really good quality products, but knowing that there's so much, sugar and processed food options for kids? How do you think about just helping make your kids have the right decisions with their food too?
That is something that I have put a lot of thought into, because both Jeff and I have struggled with our own kind of mentality around food for different reasons. Really, it's how we were raised. So I want to make sure that we do that differently with our children. And I encourage them both to listen to what their body's telling them. Are you full? Do you feel satiated? Are you, just listen to those signals to their body. And they're both very young. They're 2 and almost 4. So, but that's something that I'll continue to reinforce for them, to think about how these things are fueling their bodies. I try not to make it an either or of, well, you have to have a bite of this to have dessert, or because then it almost elevates dessert to this level of status versus let's fuel our body with protein. Then we can have a conversation around dessert. Because I came from kind of the scarcity mindset of, we didn't get any of those things. We never got Coke. We never had, we didn't have any sweets in the house, nothing. And then when I went to college, I was like, oh my gosh, I can have anything that I want, so I don't want to fuel that mindset either. I want to fuel the mindset of making the choices and listening to what their body's telling them instead of having to relearn that later in life.
Yeah. And I mean, you guys are familiar with some of my journey. My biggest struggle personally and with the girls is I didn't want to trade one bad relationship with food for a different bad relationship with food. So my own mentality needed and still needs a ton of work. Growing up, it was, oh, you had a bad day? Let's have some food. You had a great day. Let's celebrate with some food. Food was the answer to everything. And so then it became a security blanket. And the concept of like not eating because you weren't hungry never occurred to me until like 2 years ago. Well, when you're 40 and that's the first time you've received that data from your body, I was like, holy crap, that's not good. And that's really where I am trying to find my stride with the girls is I don't want them to feel, to Kara's point, like they can't indulge a little bit. But I also don't want to hold it so far away that when they get the opportunity, they just, jump on it like a pack of dogs. And it's trying to build that middle of the road understanding to give them the freedom to make the right choices, which I'm about a 4 out of 10 at. So I'm not sure why the hell I'm in charge, but in that realm, I'm really not. I cook a lot of steak, and Kara kind of manages all the rest of it. I'm usually one meal a day, usually around noon, and then I sit down with the girls and we have dinner as a family, and I just don't eat. Kara, on the other hand, comes from a blessed line of metabolism. If she wants to lose a pound or 2, she's like, done. Like I've never had that ability. So
you still lost 80 pounds, which is incredible.
I have. Yeah. And that movement has been interesting, but it's very much trying to keep it on the rails and make that choice repeatable long term.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the key. Just making, I think about it a lot. Brett and I don't have kids, but like when I do have a family, I want to make sure that like I'm giving them that balanced approach so they're not just think about like how much time we obsess about over food. It's like the relationship with food is so important, and I don't know, it seems like we have this abundant amount of options when it comes to food, and it's almost causing this like undue stress of like just options, and a lot of them are very addictive. So I think like the roles of like just the parents setting the example is huge. It seems like you guys do a great job of that.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
My point of reference for that outside the food is, we probably all saw it at college. The super sheltered kids that came to school,
Right.
had never partied, and they went full send.
Right.
Like, I mean, we had people on our college campus die every semester.
Yeah.
Alcohol poisoning, car wrecks, whatever it may be. Man, you got to give your kids, and I'm not condoning underage drinking, but it's like, how do you temper someone so that when they go into a situation like that, they don't just go full send?
Yeah.
That's such an internal struggle for me. And Kara and I both love to just, we're going to a nice restaurant, send it. We're going to have a good time. Well, but you don't do that every day. Yeah. But it took a long time to learn that. And what do you do when they're 18 and they go off to college? Like, those are the kind of things keep you up at night.
Mm-hmm. Kara, you were mentioning earlier the politicalization of food, and I'm so curious about the farm bill that's coming up and just getting people like yourselves like understanding of it and just interpretation of what's at stake with this farm bill coming up. So just curious what you guys are thinking about when you hear the farm bill is on the docket again in a few months, right?
I think so. Usually it's November-ish.
Yeah.
But that's why they almost had the shutdown, right? Because they were worrying about the farm bill.
Yeah.
I'm way out of the loop on that. I don't know about you, Kara.
Well, and I'm definitely not a political expert. One thing I will say with the farm bill in and of itself, and a lot of times we don't realize this, is the farm bill has to walk down both sides of the aisle. So that's something that can be very hard, especially from the traditional ag mindset, is the fact that there's things within the farm bill that definitely come from one side of the aisle and then come from the other. So the cohesiveness of that from both sides of the aisle is incredibly important to make sure that the farm bill does get passed and go forward.
You want to break that down a little bit?
I believe it's about 80% of the farm bill actually, has food stamps or WIC or any of those types of food subsidies. That's actually the majority of the farm bill. And then the rest of it, would impact us on, the farming side or the production side. But that was very striking to me to realize that actually was the majority of the farm bill as far as farm bill funding went into that comparatively to any sort of the production ag piece of the farm bill.
Yeah. That's how they got it tied together so that it continues to sail, is because both sides of the aisle have something major on the table when it comes up.
Yeah.
And shame on me, I don't know that I've ever truly paid attention to the farm bill, like what's in it, what they're arguing about. I've got friends for that, so if I get really curious, I can call them. But those kind of things, especially in the cattle industry, don't really come to us.
Yeah.
Cattle industry has basically no incentives. We don't have farm subsidies.
Yeah.
During COVID detonated the cattle market. I mean, it dropped 40% overnight, and there were some make-whole payments on that came back based on your inventory that were, I don't even know those were farm bill. I think that was just aid money.
It was relief.
Yeah.
Wow.
But in general, the cattle industry does not really see much out of the farm bill. Usually it's row crops. It's high-level crops. So peanuts, cotton, corn, soybeans, dairy are kind of the big ones that the farm bill kind of circles around. So fortunately or unfortunately, we really aren't attached to it that much.
Got it. When you think about the future of the cattle industry and just the food system in general, are you both hopeful?
I'll let you take that one first.
I am hopeful. I do think that we're seeing strides to be able to make some changes.
Yeah.
And that's part of, kind of the task that we took on to be able to help be that voice to continue change and move forward. The part that gets a little worrisome for me is the other side of it. It's the food side, the nutrition piece of that.
Yeah.
To our whole nutrition conversation, I'm actually a cow nutritionist by trade. That was what my master's degree was ruminant nutrition. So I correlate a lot of these things with, mammalian nutrition of what we're looking at today with on our side of it from, the human side. And sometimes it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is basic mammalian nutrition, and that's not how I would put together, a cow ration. And we obviously aren't exactly the same, but thinking about how we fuel bodies, just having that basic thought process of protein, energy, that we're not putting carbs in that typically, or to a minimal level. So that I think is actually more concerning to me. And then the political side of regulating our food systems to in some places not allow, red meat to even operate. That's scary that could be regulated away. So we need to be the voice of reason and connect back with the consumer, so a consumer can be like, hey, I don't think that's the best thing. So we can have more of a unified voice of, we want to be able to continue to have access to these high quality, nutritious foods that these farmers and ranchers put on our table.
I'm exceptionally hopeful, mainly because of the response we saw during COVID.
Yeah.
The amount of people that we spoke to when we were back ordered was high. We spoke, 20, 30, 40 people a day. And everybody was really chill. We had some people cancel some orders because we couldn't deliver in the time frame they wanted us to, which is reasonable, right? Hey, I got to get that money back. I'm going to go buy somewhere else. Great, no problem. We never got blasted on social media, never had a negative Google review. And to be back ordered for that long and never have that kind of failure, I took that as a win.
Definitely.
Systemically, like Kara's talking about with food systems and things, there are some things that are concerning. But I think that the number of people that want to manage their own destiny, that will make sure they have their own supply chains, that will continue to make it run in spite of some of that nonsense, I think those people are going to be more of a louder majority when things really do start to get weird.
Yeah.
And I do trust in our fellow countrymen that will come around.
Yeah.
Systemically, there are concerns for sure. But I think that silent majority is a lot more of a majority than anybody really wants to acknowledge. I don't know how we activate them to actually help some of this stuff. But I think it's conversations like this, it's systems like we've put in place or like Will Harris has put in place so that you're not reliant on the system.
Yeah.
How we do that at scale, 600,000 a year or a week, excuse me.
Yeah.
That is a totally different question. But to the comment I made earlier, to all the listeners, vote with your dollar. If you don't like the way a system is operating, okay, fund the system opposed to it.
Yeah.
Or vice versa. To sit around and complain without trying to help with a solution is called whining.
Yes.
Don't do that.
Yeah.
Nobody needs to listen to that.
Yeah.
If you're going to whine, just keep it to yourself.
Yeah.
And that's in everything. It's clothing, it's food, it's all the consumptive nature of what we do as a society. Like when Will Harris was on Rogan's podcast, he's like, how many shirts do you guys have? You probably don't need that many. I was like, well, crap. I'm guilty of that for sure. So right after that, I actually went through my closet, and anything that wasn't a brand that we support or our own brand or a brand of a friend is gone. We're being much more intentional.
Yes. And
I think that intentionality in your choices, the support you place on whatever it is something that people can probably always do just a little better. And I think people want to.
Yeah.
Have you heard the title of Will Harris's new book?
I have.
I think that's what everyone needs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A bold return to giving a damn.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like there's two parts of my brain where there's one part of my brain, I don't want to say I get depressed. It's more so I get worried when I see cities like New York that are implementing like meatless Mondays and vegan Fridays on kids. Yeah. But then there's a huge part of me that really gets encouraged, honestly, because of conversations like this, where there's been such an open sourcing of information where, hey, I have ulcerative colitis, I Google carnivore diet, and I can find all these other people that have healed their autoimmune conditions by following this path towards eating. I implement it. I get myself healthy. I get off all the drugs. We share some of those findings on the podcast. Other people that are looking for help, trying to heal themselves, they lean into that information, heal themselves too. Hey, now we're having ranchers on the podcast. People can learn how to connect with local ranchers. I feel like the tide really is shifting that way. And I almost feel like we've hit such a critical mass where it's like 90% of Americans are technically metabolically unhealthy, that I think people are just waking up to the fact that, okay, the government is recommending to consume 63% of calories in the form of processed foods. That's probably not the healthiest thing. Mm-hmm. So people are kind of open sourcing their information too. So it's not going to be easy. I know there's a lot of resistance, but I do feel like we can pull back from the brink.
Well, have you guys seen some of those videos they show of like PE classes in like the 60s?
Oh, yeah. It's insane. Yeah.
Like, shared on the stuff.
Yeah. And the kids are shredded.
Yeah. Doing like 20 pull-ups. Yeah.
I never saw a high school class that could do that,
Yeah.
myself included.
Yeah.
Like the military.
Yeah.
Well, now our military is too fat to fight because people can't even pass the basic fitness requirements. I remember Tim Kennedy said something like that on Rogan's podcast.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
And Rogan said it. Gosh, Rogan and Andy Stump recite it all the time. Weak men create hard times. Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times.
Yeah.
And I think we're on that weak men creating hard times curve right now. But I think there's a lot of people, like everybody in this room, men being used non-gender specific humans.
Yeah.
There's enough people in this room and in this movement, like all of our partners, all the people you guys have had on the show. I think there's a bigger movement than people see.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that. I'd rather it just kind of magically got back in place. Didn't have to have some big catastrophic event.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope we can avoid that.
Absolutely. What's the best way for people to connect with you and order some of your products if they're inspired by what they're hearing on the show right now?
I'm going to give you Kara's phone number. Just call her.
That's
perfect. Just kidding. Go ahead.
Just find us online would be the easiest way. So coloradocraftbeef.com. We're active on all social channels as well. They'll be at Colorado Craft Beef. And then Jeff's phone number is on the website.
We'll link that in the show notes, in bold, italicized.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love it.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys very much for having us on.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you guys.